Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 59, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. So it is the week before Thanksgiving. It's actually a few days before my birthday. I'm recording this on Friday, and my birthday is on Sunday. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. You'll have to guess. And I'm getting ready to make my fourth trek across the state of Washington since August. I'm going to Seattle to spend Thanksgiving there. Both of my girls will be there, and my mother and my sister's boyfriend are coming, and another one of my cousins lives there, so we're all going to get together and have a week of fun and shopping and eating and all the other things. I'm packing my car with all my winter gear because I have to drive over 3 mountain passes, and I don't know if, depending on where you live, how closely you were watching the weather this week, but the west coast of the United States, and particularly Seattle, had a bomb cyclone, which sounds horrific, but that's actually a legitimate meteorological term, and it just means a big storm on the order of a hurricane, but in the Pacific Northwest. So one of the passes that I drive over is Snoqualmie Pass just before I get to Seattle, and they had a blizzard warning as part of that bomb cyclone. So it's not going to be that bad this weekend, but I always have my car stocked with everything that I need when I'm on the road. So my husband bought a set of chains for my Jeep because I bought it back in March, and this is the first winter that I'll be driving it, so I need a set of chains if I'm going to be going back and forth over the passes, and he made me go out there and put them on because it does no good to have the chains in the vehicle if you don't know how to get them on the vehicle. So what have I been sewing this week? I finished the hoodies. I gave them to the boys. I pulled out some patterns. I reorganized all my patterns on Tuesday and pulled a few that I haven't traced yet and went ahead and traced them. They are mostly patterns for sweater knits because I love to sew with sweater knits, and I'm trying to fill some holes in my wardrobe. I'm trying to be intentional about buying fabric to make things that plug those holes in my wardrobe. I had an interesting conversation with some of my sewing friends yesterday. They read my blog because we all live here in the same area, and they were commenting, and these weren't unkind comments, they were more curiosity type comments, but they were commenting on the number of pieces of clothing that I make, and they were wondering how big my closet is and where I wear these pieces of clothing that I'm making. So I thought about it, and my blog post this morning was about the fact that in order to become good at something, you have to actually do the thing. So in order to become good at making clothing, you actually have to make clothing. And that can end up being kind of a conundrum. What do you do with all this clothing that you've made? So I do try to finish all my muslins, and sometimes I gift them to people or I donate them to the thrift store. You know, I made a Ramona skirt out of some blue cotton twill, and it turned out beautifully. It was my test garment, my muslin, and it turned out beautifully, but it was too big in the waist for me, and I didn't want to take it completely apart and redo it. So that will get donated to the thrift store. It's beautifully finished. The fabric is nice, and hopefully someone will come across it at the thrift store, and it will fit them perfectly, and they will be delighted to have found it. I did finish the quilts for my cousin's grandkids, and those are on their way to Ohio. So I hope that they will get a lot of use. And I'm also about halfway through finishing an English paper piecing project that I started 3 years ago when I took a class at Garden of Quilts with my friend Tara. So it's been good to see that one moving along too. I'm trying to finish some things before I start anything else. In today's episode, I'm bringing you an interview. My guest is Liz Pike, who lives in Spokane and owns a sewing school for kids and adults. I was particularly intrigued about her teaching kids because I think that if we want sewing to remain viable as an industry, and if we want kids to acquire those skills, we need to make sure that we're teaching them those skills. I've said it before on the podcast. I managed to graduate from high school without ever taking a home ec class, which I wish I had because I could use those skills instead of having to teach them to myself later in life. So I wanted to visit with Liz about what she's doing and how she's teaching her kids. And I think that you will enjoy this conversation. She talks a lot about making sure that these kids not only have the skills, but that they understand the theory behind it, that they know how to use their machines, that they have practical applications for what they're learning in school. And I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and I hope that you will too. So I am here with Liz Pike, who is the owner of Let's Get Sewing in Spokane, Washington. And we're going to have a chat this afternoon about your business and everything sewing and sewing machines. And you've already taken me on a tour of your studio. Let's talk about sewing.
Thank you. I had 5 kids and I substitute taught for a local school district for 17 years. But then the politics in public schooling was just getting too crazy and I needed to be done. But I love teaching. So I really wanted to find something I could do that would keep me still teaching, but not in a traditional school setting. And I decided, well, I knew how to sew. So that's what I would do. I learned how to sew. I was probably 8 years old or so when I was in 4-H. My mom was one of the leaders and we made an apron. But my mom sewed. She sewed almost tons of stuff for us kids. We needed a costume or a prom dress or anything. She sewed. I mean, she didn't sew jeans basically, but or t-shirts, but everything else pretty much she sewed for us. And so I learned how to sew that way.
So you started in 4-H. Did you continue sewing as your career, or you said
No,
you substitute taught?
no, I got my teaching degree at St. Martin's in 1980, and I'm certified K-12. I teach in English language arts and social studies. Because in 1983, I started my family, so I was an at-home mom. I actually didn't teach for a lot of years while the kids were growing. And then we moved to Spokane and I ended up teaching again and then substitute teaching. So, and I got my master's degree, I think in 2005. So sewing for me in my life, it kind of goes in seasons. You know, I sewed a lot when I was young. I did home ec in school, in middle school and in high school. My parents had exchange students. One of the boys from Mexico, my mom taught him how to sew, and he made a 3-piece suit for a prom. And they had to be careful not to tell his dad because they didn't think his dad would appreciate that he learned how to sew. So I've always sewn. I remember when I was in choir, the girls ensemble, we wanted matching dresses. And so we picked out this pattern. It was like a gunny sack type dress with what do you call that? That seam, the bodice comes to a point and then the
Yeah.
skirt's kind of gathered on the bodice. And then it had a big ruffle on the bottom and it had big puffy sleeves with like 8-inch long cuffs with pearl buttons. The front of the bodice was a lace overlay. And I remember my mom looking at that pattern and smacking her lips and shaking her head, going, and finally we convinced her that one of the other moms was going to help. And she finally said, all right, but you girls are going to cut out those dresses. Because that was the part she hated.
Don't we all?
Yes. And we all had our dresses. I remember stacks. We didn't have sticky notes in those days, Our names were pinned to the tops of the stacks. That was a lot of fun.
And I'm glad that you said that because sewing should be fun. It should be the kind of thing that gets kids excited.
Yeah, I think, gosh, we were so proud of those dresses when we had concerts. And I got a box of old patterns from somebody, and lo and behold, that dress pattern was in the box. There were no pattern in the envelope, but I had the picture of it.
Wow.
So that was a lot of
I am of that Gunny Sacks vintage too, so I'm imagining it in my head.
yeah, it was pale lavender, and we didn't even have the brains to try to imagine a different fabric than what was on the envelope. So our dresses pretty much looked like just what was on the envelope.
So what inspired you? You said that you were frustrated by teaching in the public school system, but what inspired you to open your own sewing school?
I had recently gotten back into sewing with a friend, and there was a sewing shop in town. It's gone since, but um, I met this woman through a bunco group that I was in, and I needed a better machine. And she convinced me to come in and found me a machine, and I've traded that machine up a couple of times. And we both talked about it. They would have classes there at that shop. And I just remember one day they had a group of kids in there, and this girl, this she must have been 8 or 9, twirling around in the middle of the room in her pajama pants that she had made. And she was so proud of that. And I just, I love working with kids, and I wanted to help kids get that experience.
So when you started, what was the first class that you taught?
Oh,
Do you remember?
yeah, it was a learn to sew class, and we made a pillowcase and a pair of pajama pants. I had a retail space. I opened that in 2014, I think. And my friend came and helped me teach, and then I started listing my classes with the Parks Department, and that got me, more kids. I did the learn to sew, which was the pillowcase and the pajama pants. But then after that, for the kids who wanted to keep coming for sewing, I started an after school program where they could come one day a week after school. And I pretty much let the kids pick their projects. It just depends. I want to make sure that they're still practicing their old skills and slowly gaining their new skills. And then with adults, I pretty much do the same thing with adults, because I get so many adults that the last time they sewed was in middle school, or their husband bought them a sewing machine and it had so many bells and whistles on it that they were too scared to take it out of the box, and so it just sat in the closet.
So I would imagine in addition to teaching sewing skills, you also teach people about their machines.
Oh yeah, that's my biggest thing. The first class with me is almost we don't do much sewing. We just go through the machine, and I talk about the different parts of the machine and how they interact together, that raising and lowering the presser foot engages and disengages the tension discs, and what ramifications that has with thread, and why people get thread barf on the bottom of their fabric. That the stitch length controls the feed dogs and how far it pulls the fabric under the needle as the needle's going up and down. That the stitch width controls the needle position, because if you're doing a straight stitch, your stitches are just marching in single file, and changing the stitch width changes where your stitches are going to march in single file. I thread the machine through the tension discs and let everybody pull to feel how it feels when the foot is up, and then I put the foot down and we pull again to see the difference.
So they're getting all the basics as well as some of the theory behind it too.
Right. And we talk about needles and how needles are only good for 8 to 10 hours of sewing. Gosh, I remember my mom never changed a needle till it broke. And she didn't understand how the tension worked. I can remember her being in tears one time because it got messed up. These things always happen on Sunday at 11 o'clock at night when you have to be done in the morning. But and she had to take her machine out of the table it was in and cart it to a mechanic to fix it, because she didn't know how it worked. I want people to have a better chance of knowing how things work on their machine so they can manipulate the variables.
So how many kids or adults do you usually have in a typical class?
My normal classes are 5 or 6. Currently, right now, I have 7 in my adult class. I have 4 on the after school class, and then I have a homeschool group that's five kids that come on Fridays. But when I run my camps in the summer, I can have I have 10 sewing machines that are all the same. So I can have up to 10 kids.
So talk a little bit about your camps over the summer. How do those work?
So the camps, I usually start the summer off with a couple of learn to sew camps. Then I have a camp that's been real popular the last couple of years. It's called Science and Stuffies. And it's about the history of how sewing machines got invented. So we start that camp with a hand sewing project because sewing machines haven't been invented yet. And then then I pull out my non-electric machines. I've got 4 treadles and 2 hand cranks. And we make these heart pillows that get donated to a local crisis nursery, Vanessa Behan. And then so we do that for a couple of days, and then we pull out the regular sewing machines and we make a stuffed animal. So the first year we made a bear, the second year we made a shark. It happened to be Shark Week. And last year we did cats.
That must be fun for the kids to get to,
So
to sew on the treadle and use the hand crank.
it is. I've got a couple of videos. Well, I know I have at least one video on my Facebook page that shows the students sewing on the treadles. It's a lot of fun.
Do you have kids who come for several different camps over the summer? So like you have repeat customers?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Then after that, one summer I did a quilting class and it was all focused on math and the math in quilting, and the kids got to design their own quilt squares. So I'm trying to keep the STEM or STEAM connection with school too. The end of summer I do an open sew where the kids can come and sew whatever they want. Usually in May, whatever Saturday is closest to the 14th, we have what's called Pi Day. No, it's in March.
March,
January,
yeah.
February, March. It's got to be March 14th. Pi Day, and then we do circle skirts.
Oh, how
And
cool.
we take the measurements and do the math and draw the patterns.
I'd be willing to bet that their teachers are very appreciative of them getting to use those skills over the summer instead of forgetting them.
Yeah, I do. I try when we're doing things to talk about to use the math words. When they're pinning their pajama pants and you get down to the bottom where the pant leg flares out a little bit so that it's wide enough when you turn it up to hem. So I said, they're going to pin at the end, and I want to pin in the vertice of the obtuse angle.
That's good because those are good terms for the kids to know. Those are good terms for adults to know too.
I try to make as many connections back to what I know they're doing in school, whether it's math or English, terminology or whatever.
Did you have any challenges during COVID? Did you have to shut down at
Oh,
all?
I did have to shut down.
Did you?
Yep, I did. That's when I kind of lost my contract with the parks department too. Um, it was just too much with masking. It's too hard to teach and wear a mask. So yeah, COVID kind of shut everything down for a couple of years. So now it's mostly just word of mouth again, and things are starting to pick up. Oh, in the summertime too, I did a crafting camp that didn't have any sewing at all, but we did tie dyeing and needle felting, and so we were still doing fiber things.
So you start your adults out too with a pillowcase and the pajama pants?
Mm-hmm.
Do the adults want to do things maybe that the kids don't want to do? Do you see a difference
Yeah,
between
yeah.
what the adults want to sew?
Yes, there is. And a lot of them are just interested in learning how to hem their jeans or shorten a sleeve on a blouse, or it's their favorite blouse, but it doesn't quite fit anymore. So what can we do to make it fit?
Okay.
Or is there a way to copy this pattern so I can make more of this? So I do a lot of that. I also have had an adult class that's called Sewing with Your Feet, where we go through the different feet for the sewing machine and those different techniques. And I've had a serger class before a couple of times. And pretty much, yeah, they're just picking projects that are more, they want to make aprons, and the adults want to make pillow covers or, things for their house.
Right. Home deck projects and
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you teach pattern drafting at all?
I can. I have the knowledge and I've got the resources and the books and the skills. What I find generally is that people don't have the patience for it because there's really a lot of trial and error when you're coming up with a pattern. You can get close, but you can't, you still, how many mock-ups do you have to make before you finally get one that fits the way you want? And a lot of people don't have that patience. So I took several classes from a woman named Connie Crawford, who's done a lot of patterns for more mature sizes of women. The nice thing about her patterns is there she actually draped fabric on women of size so that the proportions in the pattern are better. And I have her college textbook that she wrote, and it has in the beginning chapter, it has where it takes you through drawing a block pattern for a blouse with measurements. And I did the measurements, and I tried to draw that, follow that formula probably about 5 or 6 times. Got a friend to help me. Finally, I called her up and I said, I've been trying to do this block thing. And she interrupted me and she says, "It doesn't work, does it?" And I said, "No, I thought it was supposed to work." But it only works when you have a perfectly proportional body. But what I learned from that exercise was, after doing it a number of times, was where you could start to fudge the numbers to
Hmm.
make it work. But again, I find that people, they think that's what they want to do, but when we start that process, they don't really want to put the time and effort into doing it.
I just took a trouser drafting class.
Yeah, I listened to your talk about that. I That sounded really interesting.
It was, but probably the most fascinating part of it was that we had 9 students in the class, 8 women and 1 man, and we were all
Mm-hmm.
shaped differently. It was Kenneth King, and he said, the guy, the lone guy that was in the class, knocked his draft out right away. It didn't take him very long,
Right.
and it took the women, almost 2 days to get a working
Mm-hmm.
draft.
Yeah. I took a class from Kenneth. I went to New York and did a an event there that Threads magazine had.
Oh yeah.
And he's a wonderful teacher.
Oh, he's amazing.
That last year, right before COVID started, was the last Sew Expo in Puyallup. And I actually won a class for the school in Tacoma, but then that was COVID. And then
Yeah.
after, I mean, I think I still have the envelope with the certificate in it pinned to my board, but I just never was able to use it.
Oh, you should go and take a class.
I would like to. I really would.
So, what kinds of things do you think you're going to be doing going forward? Obviously, continuing to teach these classes, because every time I look on Facebook and I see your Facebook page, you've got new classes coming up. So clearly,
Yeah,
there's a demand for it.
there is. I think it's nice that it's a really safe place for kids to be. They're learning a real skill. My pricing is it's cheaper than music lessons, but basically my pricing works out to be $10 an hour for lessons. And that's pretty much across the board, whether it's kids or adults. I try to keep the kids interested with just different things. We'll sew with vinyl, or we did the iron on vinyl on candy wrappers and chip bags and made zipper pouches out of that. And I have these little triangular zipper pouches that only use half a zipper that the kids really like to make. I find it fun to demonstrate that to adults because you actually cut the ends off the zipper and pull the zipper apart. And that's really scary for adults.
Maybe not quite as scary for the kids. They probably think that that's a
No.
lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they don't have those. I think the things that adults are more afraid of in sewing is, well, threading and tension, zippers and buttonholes.
Have any of your kids gone on to do more things with their sewing beyond?
I've had a couple. I've had one girl who was doing some contests through a Christian private school, and she was making outfits and winning prizes. in that event. I have a student right now that's coming up with her plan. She wants to do the Make It with Wool event this next year. I actually have there's a local fiber artist, maybe you know her, Linda Cubic. Do you know Linda Cubic?
I haven't heard of her name.
She lives in Ritzville, and she's a weaver, and she's served on the Make It with Wool committee, I think, for several years. And she sent me a text saying, did I have any students who wanted to do that? And she had wool to donate for them. So she's
Oh, how
sending me
cool.
samples. And I've got another student who was in the sheep to shawl at the
Uh-huh.
fair last year. I think the biggest thing that I find is there's lots of kids that want to learn how to sew, but they don't know how to do it, and their parents don't know how to get them going in that process. They don't know what kind of machines to buy. Machines are really hard right now because to get a good, solid entry level machine, you're probably spending $300 to $600.
Do you advertise to the schools? Do you let the schools know that you have a program, or is it all word of mouth?
It's all word of mouth. I can't actually go. The schools won't let you advertise unless you're nonprofit.
Okay.
Now, I have put my flyers out in several of the Catholic schools around the area. They'll let me. And actually, occasionally, I still substitute in this diocesan schools, so that's been a help. And I take my flyers to all of the, to Joann's and to Hobby Lobby and the different fabric stores in the area.
I'm curious. You said you have 10 of the same machine. What machine do you start your kids out on?
So they say that they're a Singer featherweight. So some company bought some company because that whole conglomeration now, the Singer Viking FAF
Right.
SVP, they came out with this product. I think they needed a product to come out with in a hurry. It was a very short run. You can't buy the machines anymore, which is frustrating. But what they did was they took a FAF Passport 2.0 and they put it in a Singer wrapper.
Hmm.
So my machines say Singer featherweight, but they've got the integrated dual feed like FAF does. The machines come with about, I don't know, 69 stitches. That has a needle up, needle down, has a start stop button. It's a 7 millimeter machine, so at least you get that much width out of your stitches.
So definitely not the most basic of machines.
No, it's not. And I tell parents, that if they're looking for a machine, if they can get one that's got needle up, needle down, and speed control on it, that pretty much the machine will have whatever kind of features that they're going to need for a while.
Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
Um, I think some of the local things I've been involved with, I did finally join the Quilt Guild this year, but there's a group in Spokane that's called Zero Waste,
Uh-huh.
and they've been setting up these mending cafes all over town. They do them in libraries. They've done them up at Green Bluff, where they just put out the word that people are going to be there, and ladies come and bring their sewing machines and a handful of whatever they feel like grabbing: fabric, thread, colors, elastic, snaps, buttons, whatever. And people show up with their clothing that needs mended.
Oh, how
And,
cool.
and they line up, and then they get passed off to someone with a machine, and that person does the mending for them. And it's
Wow.
free. And so it's all to try and promote zero waste so that we have fewer textiles going into our waste stream.
Landfills,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and I'd like to do more classes that are, I can knit, so I'd like to do some knitting classes. I can embroider. I'd like to do embroidery classes. Some of those things, though, they take more time, and people more and more want that instant gratification.
Hmm.
So it's finding people who are willing to commit to doing things slowly.
Because it could take 6 weeks minimum to knit a sweater, even a simple sweater. I'm kind of laughing in the back of my head because I made myself a sweater yesterday, but I sewed it on my serger. And I used to
Right.
be a knitting designer, so I think, they're going to take my license away from me. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. This has been a fun chat.
Thank you.
Just a few housekeeping notes. I'm traveling when this episode drops. I plan to have an episode next week. I have another interview. I may not get it posted on Tuesday. It depends somewhat on my travel schedule and when I get back. It may post later on Tuesday. It may post Wednesday morning. So just know that I'm planning to have an episode next week, but it may be delayed by a day or two. Thank you for the feedback and especially for the ratings that I've been getting on Apple Podcasts. You don't know how much that means because it really does help bump the podcast up and help people to find it. So I appreciate it. If you want to send me feedback or episode suggestions, guest suggestions, I've gotten some of those, so I'll be following up on those in the coming weeks. Email me at janet@janetzabo.com or use the comment feature on the show notes page at the website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. Or you can use the fan mail feature, which goes to Buzzsprout, my podcast host. If you want to take a look at what I'm sewing, you can find it on my blog. The best way to get to the blog is to go to my website at www.janetzabo.com. That has links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website with my knitting patterns, as well as to the podcast page and to my blog. If you are in the United States, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And if you are elsewhere, I wish you many hours of happy sewing. So until the next episode, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.